On August Bank holiday last year, one of the biggest nightclubs in Wales was swept by fire. The police suspected the fire had been started deliberately. 15 months later, their inquiries have got nowhere. But we can reveal tonight that there is a major investigation going on into the insurance claim for £500,000. The ruins still scar the town of Porthcawl.
We assumed that once the building had burnt down, that it would not be long before the ruins would be removed completely. This didn't turn out to be the case, and we've had a long battle since that to try and get the building initially made safe, and now to have it demolished completely.
The story is a lesson to every town faced with a crisis like the Stoneleigh fire. The problem is that the owner of the company that owns the club has hidden his identity. But we can reveal that he also owns a village and a caravan site 2 miles from the Stoneleigh Club. He has a home in Guernsey, villas in Spain, and a flat in Tenerife. But it was at the Happy Valley caravan site that we found him. His name is Eric Morgan. Earlier this year, Wales This Week devoted 2 programmes to Mr. Morgan. We exposed his questionable business activities. We interviewed a number of victims. Mr. Morgan demanded an apology. But as a direct result of the programmes, we received more information on his activities. It centred on Porthcawl and the Stoneleigh Club. He bought the club in the early 80s. In 1984, he leased the club to a company involving local businessman George Bynon.
We spent about £250,000 refurbishing it and reopened it as a disco, mainly as a disco, but with cabaret on certain occasions.
What kind of audiences did you attract?
We were getting between 1,000 and 1,200 people on a Friday and Saturday night.
But at the time, George Bynon had a problem. He was an undischarged bankrupt. By law, he couldn't be a company director. To get round the problem, his 20-year-old son became a director of the company that took over the Stoneleigh Club.
My son personally guaranteed the rent as a director.
And how much was that?
A starting rent of £20,000 a year.
It all meant the Stoneleigh Club belonged to a company called Tope Limited. It's now known that Tope is registered in Guernsey in the Channel Islands. But at the time, Eric Morgan was the person who dealt with George Bynon.
Did you ever deal with anybody else other than Mr. Morgan as far as your relationship with Tope was concerned?
No.
Did you believe that he was Tope?
Yes.
Did anything in particular lead you to that conclusion?
Well, we never spoke to anybody else other than him.
Did he ever tell you that he owned the company?
No, he always insisted that he didn't. But I didn't believe him.
What did he say his relationship was with Tope?
That he was just an advisor to the company.
But within a year, the Stoneleigh Club was hitting trouble. The debts began to mount. George Bynon decided to try to sell or assign his lease. He told Eric Morgan.
He wanted money to assign the lease.
Was he entitled to any money?
No.
What was the arrangement in the lease for assigning it?
It was a standard lease, and it said that the lease shouldn't be assigned without the landlord's consent, such consent not to be unreasonably withheld.
This is the Stoneleigh Club lease. Nowhere in it does it state that the landlord, Eric Morgan, or his company, Tope Limited, are to be paid any money if the lease is sold on. But Morgan demanded £10,000 from George Bynon.
I said that we wouldn't pay the £10,000, and he said that if we didn't pay the 10, he would make sure that the company went into liquidation and that he would sue my son under the guarantee of the company. and that if my son didn't pay it, that he would make him bankrupt. And I said, well, I don't think he'd have the money to pay it anyway. And he said, no, but he said, I believe his mother has money, and I wouldn't imagine that she would allow him to go bankrupt. I said, well, that's blackmail. He said, well, be it as it may, that is what we want. So under that pressure, I agreed to pay the £10,000. But when it came then to the assignment, he wanted 20 instead of 10. And we were so far down the line by this time with the agreement and what have you that we were left with, the only choice that was left with was to either pay the 20 or to allow the company to go there and then, and for him to sue my son. So I took the course to protect my son.
At this stage, Morgan made no pretense of being anything other than the landlord. He wanted the £20,000. The lease was altered to make it appear the money was paid for car parking. We have a signed statement from the manager who took over that the money was paid.
How would you describe the way he got that £20,000 now?
It was criminal blackmail. Or moral blackmail, whichever way you want to put it. It was blackmail.
The new company running the Stoneleigh Club also fared badly. Business declined. Even worse, the licensing hours were cut from 2 a.m. to midnight. The value of the Stoneleigh as a nightclub plummeted. The club closed and the receiver moved in. The restaurant next door also suffered from the loss of trade. Chris Harrison and his wife Jackie opened their restaurant in 1988. Within a year, there was a first fire at the Stoneleigh Club.
The first fire, somebody come in about 9 o'clock, some passerby on the street, come straight up to me as I was behind the bar and sorting out the bills, and said, did you know there was a fire above on the roof of your building? So I sort of looked in amazement, but at the same time dropped what I was doing and went outside, crossed over the road and looked up, and I did see flames and smoke.
The fire was in the Stoneleigh Club 2 floors above Harrison's restaurant. The fireman who dealt with the blaze showed Mrs. Harrison what had happened.
There was a fire in the middle of the floor, which they showed us was started deliberately. That then fell through into the bar, and then the bar and the dance floor was above our restaurant. And what we had from that fire was just smoke damage and water damage.
It was 7 months later, on August 29th, 1989, that the main fire swept through the Stoneleigh Club. It was a bank holiday, and the fire was spotted in the early hours of the morning. It was one of the biggest fires in Wales for years. It took firemen several hours to bring it under control. The Stoneleigh Club had been closed for a year, so almost from the start the fire was treated as suspicious. The police were called in.
There was somebody coming down to investigate, obviously, because they knew then that the Stoneleigh had no electrics or anything on, and it could have been down to us. So there was an investigation and everything going on, and police had an interview with my husband and whatever. And then a few days later on, they said it was started in the Stoneleigh. Apparently there was about 5 to 6 small fires started in the Stoneleigh Club.
It was soon apparent that the club had been virtually destroyed. The adjacent premises, like Harrison's restaurant, were also badly affected. Early estimates suggested it would cost a couple of £1 million to rebuild the club. Local residents expected quick action, but they were soon disappointed and increasingly worried.
We first contacted the local council, the town council, and told them of our worries. There were asbestos sheets there, and loose fragments of the building girders even were hanging. Some work was done on it piecemeal, haphazardly, by inexpert people in the early months after that.
The Porthcawl Town Council was also unhappy. They began a search for the real owners of the club. The town clerk was officially instructed to find out who owned Tope Limited.
Even a visit to and many phone calls and correspondence to companies' house in Cardiff could not, at that point of date, inform us of the owners.
Do you know who the owners are now?
No.
The Harrisons and the people in the fish bar next door have no doubt who their landlord was. They dealt with Eric Morgan, both before and after the main fire at the Stoneleigh.
Well, we always assumed it was Eric Morgan. I mean, we'd ring up this number, and if he wasn't there, he'd be in Guernsey. We wouldn't obviously speak to him then. Nobody would give a number.
Was there ever any suggestion that anybody else might ultimately own Harrison's restaurant, other than Mr. Morgan?
No, I don't know.
As far as you are concerned, you've always believed he owned the place?
Yes, well, I mean, ourselves and the land belonged to him, as far as I know, yes.
Eric Morgan himself actually supervised work on the Stoneleigh remains. These photographs were taken there. The work was done on the insistence of Oggur Borough Council. But at this stage, they didn't know of Eric Morgan's connection with Tope Limited. The council was concerned that the remains were unsafe, as well as being an eyesore in a town which is a holiday resort. Some of the men working on the site are employed by Morgan. We were to meet this man again when we tried to find Mr. Morgan at Wigvark near Porthcawl. Morgan owns most of the village and stays there sometimes when he's in Wales.
You know, Mr. Morgan is in Porthcawl at the moment.
What do you want me for?
I'm just asking if you...
Just on what? What are you putting that on me for?
I'm just asking if you know where Mr. Morgan is.
Just don't put them things on me, right? Have you got it straight down?
I'm just asking if you know where Mr. Morgan is.
Just you get off my auto, Amy.
Your name, sir?
You got no right.
I'm just
Ask me questions.
I'm just asking if you know where Mr. Morgan is.
No right, ask me a question.
We then tried to find Mr. Morgan in Guernsey. We knew he had a home there. Our inquiries revealed that Tope Limited was registered at these offices in the centre of St. Peter Port, the island's capital. It's entirely legal to set up a company in Guernsey using nominee shareholders and directors. The name of the company has to be displayed publicly at the registered office. But the only official information on Tope Limited comes from the Guernsey court officers. It's sparse. It lists 7 shareholders and 2 directors. There's no apparent connection with Eric Morgan.
Having got this list, I intend to make contact with someone in the Channel Islands who I hope will be able to follow this up and let me know whether they are sort of real people who are active in this company or whether they're just a front for somebody else.
Morgan's phone number in Guernsey is listed in the telephone book under the name of another of his companies. That company's registered office and most of its shareholders are the same as those of Tope Limited. Mr. Morgan bought this house in St. Peter Port, Guernsey. He says he lives here. We tried several times to see him here, but he was never at home.
I know that one of the difficulties Oggur Borough Council have had is establishing who they need to serve the writs on in order to get work carried out at on the Stoneleigh site. And it took them some time to establish that.
Porthcawl Town Council also asked Tope's solicitors who owned the company. They weren't satisfied with the reply. The solicitors told them that they would pass on all correspondence to the company.
We are informed by the borough and by solicitors at Cardiff that all correspondence must go through these solicitors. So that unfortunately inform is as far as we can go at this point of time. The solicitors will not inform us of the owners.
The identity of the Stoneleigh's owner is also important to the insurance company dealing with the fire. They want to know whether the owner has fully disclosed any links with previous fires. Tope Limited is seeking more than £500,000 insurance. A major investigation is underway into the claim. It's led by a former senior detective. We passed our information to him. There is evidence of earlier fires at the club.
There was one there, but it was a deliberate one, I think, by the people that were, well, the customers. They just put it up behind the door and set fire to some rubbish and things.
Can you remember when that was?
Oh, crikey. It's got to be 84, 85.
At the time, Eric Morgan directly employed Mrs. Richards. She was working for him to pay for a caravan she'd bought from him. She had no doubt that he owned the Stoneleigh Club.
He had a disco on the second floor at the Stoneleigh. Not the main part where the theatre part was, where there was a stage and everything. Upstairs on the second floor, there was a disco there, and there was a fire there too.
There have been a number of fires at premises owned by or linked to Eric Morgan. The earliest we could trace occurred at the then Rivermouth Club at Ogmore near Bridgend. The fire was in May 1976. At the time, Morgan owned the club. A man was later convicted of arson. At Llandow Trading Estate near Cowbridge, there was a huge fire in June 1985. It was one of the biggest in Wales at that time, and it destroyed a hangar. A year later, Eric Morgan received £650,000 in an insurance payout. By this time, Morgan had secretly bought another prime site in the centre of Porthcawl. It was the condemned Dunraven Court flats.
Do you know who the owners of Dunraven Court are?
No.
The flats were built in the 1970s. They were financed by a forward-looking co-ownership scheme. It was aimed at pensioners who wanted to retire by the sea.
It was an ideal situation in as much as in the middle of town. There was a lift provided, so at that particular time my wife was suffering from arthritis, so it helped her, and it was an ideal retirement home for us.
But the retirement dream turned into a nightmare. Structural problems developed, and by 1984 it was decided the residents would have to leave. A report by leading consultants condemned the flats.
The only thing that they suggested was to take it down completely, rebuild it 4 stories high instead of 6, and it would cost £1 million. And the cost, of course, was out of all, couldn't be looked upon at all by the either the government or the Welsh office or the Housing Corporation.
After the flats were emptied, they were sold to a Cardiff-based company. They said they had development plans. But 4 years later, they remain much as they were when the residents left.
It's a surprise of my life because, as far as I know, the building had to be monitored every 6 months when we were there to see that it was safe. But there's nothing has been done to the outside at all to make it any safer. It's exactly the same as it was before.
Morgan agreed the Dunraven Court deal with a property developer from England, Jack Purdy. He was to provide the expertise to redevelop the flats. Morgan was to provide the money.
We made it what appeared to be an attractive proposition for me to come down to Wales to develop Dunraven Court in conjunction with him. But it didn't work out that way.
According to Jack Purdy, there were various problems in agreeing the deal with Eric Morgan. But eventually, Morgan persuaded him to put in £30,000 in cash.
It was my wife's money, and it wasn't what was originally envisaged. And we were left to sweat it out for a week, in which we couldn't get hold of him. And eventually, because we'd virtually burnt our bridges, we accepted that we would put £30,000 into the company. Right?
By burning your bridges, you mean you'd sold your house?
Sold our property and we'd moved into Wales.
Although Eric Morgan was involved, his name does not appear on the company documents. A nominee director represented Morgan's interests. Morgan himself was a tax exile. But before work could begin on Dunraven Court, there was a further problem. It was typical of the dealings people have had with Eric Morgan.
Morgan just disappeared. And it was impossible to find him. He changed all his telephone numbers, even his mother's house. Right? And for over a year, from when we took possession, he didn't appear, or when he was in Wales, I couldn't get hold of him. Right? And then, to my amazement, I found myself in a similar situation to other people that I'd now met who'd been involved with Morgan.
Jack Purdy has spent the past 4 years trying to get his money back from Eric Morgan. He still can't understand why Morgan ruined both their friendship and a sound business deal.
Financially, he would have appeared to have perhaps gained a lot, but he's lost a lot more than he's gained because he's lost a relationship which he doesn't understand.
With you?
Yeah. Or with anybody. He doesn't understand it. Money is his God.
We tried over a long period of time to find Mr. Morgan. We wanted to ask him a number of questions. We eventually met him at Wig Var.
Mr. Morgan, good morning. Good morning, Mr. Morgan. I'm with the Wales This Week programme from HTV.
I'm sorry, I don't have any time to talk to you.
I'd just like to ask you if you'd like to take part in a programme we're doing about Porthcawl and about your interest in Porthcawl.
No, I'm not interested in talking at the moment. I've got contract here.
Well,
look,
what I'd like to do...
Do you mind?
Mr.
Put that
Morgan,
camera down. Will you put that camera down, please?
Mr. Morgan...
If you were implying that this is a private property...
Can I ask
now,
you if you'd like to
private?
arrange a time and place we'd like to do the interview with you?
You get away from here at the moment.
Eric Morgan has still not given us an interview. Although Borough Council has given his company a 6-month ultimatum to sort out the Stoneleigh site. Some work has been done. On Tuesday, we had a letter from Morgan's solicitor. It said there was no mystery about the Stoneleigh's owner. The Stoneleigh belongs to Tope Limited.
From the council's point of view, what they are obviously worried about is having to prove the case in court against someone or against a company which has, in all their dealings with them so far, proved to be very elusive and not at all forthcoming in any voluntary sense to put these matters right.
The insurance investigation over the Stoneleigh fire is continuing. The insurance money still hasn't been paid. In the meantime, the building is a blot on the town of Porthcawl.
The town council will not be satisfied until the area has been completely rebuilt and we have not this ugly monstrosity protruding above the town skyline.
They've stated on a number of occasions that it would not be long. We've been given 3 months, 6 months extensions, by which time it was said the building would be down. But it's still there, and if we had the same sort of situations at Unraven Flats, it's going to be there another 8 years.
Wyn Griffiths believes there are lessons for every town from the Stoneleigh saga. He wants a change in the law. He wants a register showing the true identity of the owners of town centre sites.
Why shouldn't the Borough Council automatically know who owns all of the companies and sites which are operated within their area, so that when there is a situation like the Stoneleigh club, which has been burnt down as I saw and is probably unsafe, that the Borough Council can very quickly get hold of the responsible people and get something done about it.